Welcome back to another episode of the Wild Wisdom Podcast. I'm your host, Alyssa Fennig, and this is your space to learn more about the mind-body connection with strategies to connect to your innate wisdom so you can unleash the powerful, confident woman you're meant to be. And today's episode is sponsored by my Wild Wisdom Retreats. If you're ready to escape to the heart of nature and spend time reconnecting to your wild wisdom and feminine energy through yoga, meditation, and working with horses as a mirror to yourself, join me for a weekend you'll never forget this November 15th through 17th just outside of Indianapolis. Go to alyssafennig.com/November 2019 to learn more and save your spot. And while you're on the website, go to the retreat page, check out the schedule for next year. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Wild Wisdom Podcast. I'm your host, Alyssa Fennig. I'm excited to have Dr. Danielle Cornelius with us today. She is a chiropractor and holistic pelvic care practitioner. This is something that I am very excited to always learn more about, and something that I really love sharing with my clients because I feel like it's a root thing, and she'll talk about the root as well. So thank you for being on, Danielle.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
So first, I like to just share with the audience, because they kind of want to know, how'd you get to where you are? And I'm sure it's a long and twisted journey, but maybe a summary of what led you into holistic practices, into chiropractic, and even holistic pelvic care.
Okay. I'll try to be as brief as possible because it is very twisty. I started out, in the corporate world, actually doing like communications and web design back in the 90s. And I liked it, but there was like something calling me to deeper work. And I always had kind of wanted to work in the alternative healthcare realm or healthcare. When I was little, I used to think I maybe would be a midwife, and I'm not sure how I knew what a midwife was, because I had a really grew up in a small town, Oregon, and had a pretty mainstream family. So there was a calling. Mm-hmm. And then, so I decided, after doing a lot of research, for whatever reason, I decided chiropractic. There was something about it. It's physical, like we're moving around, and I was in a cubicle farm. So I was really interested in becoming a little bit more physical. But while I was in school, it wasn't resonating with me very deeply. I went to a school that's extremely evidence-based and extremely concerned with being accepted by the medical industry. Mm-hmm. And I really was drawn to alternative health. So there was something, and it was very sports focused, and I'm not athletic. So at first I was like, what was I thinking? What did I do this for? Because it's a very physical job, and you have to be really coordinated in these weird ways. So it took me a while to get the hang of chiropractic. And in the meantime, when I graduated, it was right when like the economy was falling apart back in 2009. And there weren't a lot of like jobs or opportunities to learn on the job. So I had to just go into practice. And I kind of was unsure about whether I wanted to continue doing that, or I was always doing websites on the side. So I kept doing that type of work. And then one of my friends turned me on to Tammy Kent. For some reason, I never heard of her. And she's right here in Portland, like right down the street from where I was. And as soon as I found Wild Feminine, I took that book, and like probably within the first 5 pages, I was just bawling my head off. and I read through the whole entire book, and contacted Tammy probably the next day or whenever the next weekday was, and got into her class within a couple months. And that was it for a few years. That's the only thing I wanted to do. So I just like really resonated with pelvic care and the energy work. I hadn't really had a concept for a lot of that at that point. And so then I didn't want to do chiropractic adjusting or like rehab or anything like that. I just wanted to do holistic pelvic care. So for many years, that's what I did. And then over the years, I started integrating chiropractic back in and looking for people who went to different schools than I did, who are a lot more energy-based chiropractors. Mm-hmm. And then I really started getting the bug for chiropractic too. And now I integrate all of it.
Oh, I love that. Well, because, you did reference that there's like 2 schools of thought in chiropractic. There's the original, more energy-based, and then we want to be accepted by the medical community. I would say that's in yoga therapy as well.
I think it's probably everywhere.
Yeah, everybody's kind of, osteopathic physicians have the same issues. I actually have a friend I'm going to interview soon. And so, I think it's great that you kind of wove that back in, and in the way that you think was wonderful and right. But I didn't know that you went for a while kind of away from chiropractic and just worked on holistic pelvic care, which I totally understand, because when you're trained in several different modalities and you see one as like, this is really the root issue, or this is really where we need to focus, because I get that way. I have a therapy background, the Thai massage, loving craniosacral now, which I'll thank friend Cherie for that. And the wild feminine stuff. And it's like, how does this all integrate? So I would love for you to explain just what is holistic pelvic care, because we'll link to your website and Tammy Kent's book. And that is something I'm trying to share around Indianapolis more of that, because it resonates so much with me. But just what is that in general for everyone?
Okay. Holistic pelvic care is physical medicine and energy medicine combination. And it's muscle, myofascial release. Well, as you speak of craniosacral therapy, Tammy kind of explained, Tammy Kent created holistic pelvic care and wrote the book Wild Feminine. She explains holistic pelvic care like craniosacral work in the vagina. So it's pelvic floor work, and the pelvic floor, the vagina itself is just it's like a nest of muscles. And there's lots of different muscles that are involved. And there's a lot of just different patternings that can happen, like dysfunctional patterns in the pelvic floor. You hear about a lot of women, especially in exercise classes, who like pee themselves a little bit when they cough or sneeze. And this type of work really helps for that, because it's muscle imbalance that we're addressing. Or pelvic pain. A lot of women can't have intercourse because there's just like those muscles are really locked up. And there's speaking of that, a lot of times there's trauma. Women go through a lot of trauma. The vagina goes through a lot of trauma. And this work just really helps release the muscles and the energy that gets stored there in the whole pelvic bowl. So the pelvis is shaped like a bowl, and we really are good at gestating and containing energy. And we haven't been taught how to kind of release. Like, we're also good at releasing. If you think about the menstrual cycle, once a month, we gestate a lot and then we release. And so there's an energetic component to this work too. So it's physical and energy medicine. We work on the muscles, and then we also work with breath work and visualization to help women actually release on an energy level too, which I find to be so powerful. I used to not really understand the energetics, so I just did the physical. And then when I would just say things like, well, Tammy says this muscle is usually connected to this emotion. And even just saying that, people would weep. And then I would feel these muscles like just holding so tight. And then all of a sudden, when I did that part of it, it would just release.
Oh, wow.
So,
that's so important. And because of the yoga therapy background, the energetics I understand, although of course applying to the whole pelvic bowl and the way she talks about in Wild Fem is totally different, which I love. But I will share a funny story with you, because I've done a lot of those practices and using her book kind of as a self-manual. I told my ex-boyfriend, I can tell that the left side is, not as on and whatever. And one time when we were, I know this is TMI, but my audience knows how I am. But like, I felt it like unlock during sex one time, and was like, it's because I was doing the work of getting in touch with that area. But I remember telling him, we were having a drink, and he goes, it's not just one cylinder muscle.
That's my favorite, because most people think the vagina is a tube, like a penis-shaped tube.
Yeah.
And it's not.
And I was like, no, it's not just one. But I was sort of like, that everybody thinks that. And it's like, no. There's it's very intricate.
It's a shapeshifter, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, explain that, the whole shapeshifter, like tell.
Well, it's like the muscle, I guess, if you were looking at a plastic model, that's how they make it look like a tube shape. But it's really just this really flat muscle that is round, I guess, but it's flat usually. Like if you put your finger in there, it's like you feel the walls against your finger. It's not like there's this opening really. Yeah. And then when you have a baby, it can stretch way out. If you're having sex, it'll, the muscles start to relax and it opens up more and more and more the more you're willing and open. Yeah. And it can tighten up when you are not willing and open, and everything in between and all around. It's a shapeshifter. I can't say the words out backwards.
I love how you explain it that way, because I think for our audience, to realize that there's so much in this space, and how,
Yeah.
The muscles can change, and everything, and we're not just, you know, a cylinder,
like we're not robot. Yeah, we're not robots.
Yeah, that was probably one of the funniest things that I could
Yeah.
hear, because it was, I looked at it, but I'm also very in touch with my body,
Yeah.
and not everyone is. And and so it was like, wow, gosh, I'm such a weirdo in a sense.
I think it's good, Tammy always says talking about your vagina or touching your vagina should be as benign as like touching your ear or your nose. Like,
I agree.
It's just part of our bodies. And that's just how we release that shame that we were talking about before we started, that people carry and went in this part of the body. There's embarrassment. People don't want to talk about it. But once you open the window and you let go of the shame, people want to talk about it all the time.
Oh, yeah. And I think it's very important. Well, let's talk a little bit about the shame that women hold in this part of the body.
Yeah.
Because, we all know and sense it, but we don't know at the same time.
Yeah.
So if you'd love to elaborate.
That one, it's, if you think about like everything we learn about ourselves or about the female body in general from the time we're really small, whether it's in religion or in advertising, marketing, excuse me, there's just a lot there's a lot put upon the female or the woman or the feminine. And we tend to absorb that and just take it in and internalize it. And so a lot, like people, I think just a lot of people carry shame when it comes to the genital area at all, because we have issues with sex and we have issues with body. Like, I personally think a lot of it stems from religion.
Yeah.
I think when patriarchy kind of came in and took over spiritual practices, it kind of made the female like bad, quote unquote, and we take that in. And then there's so much abuse and rape and issues, and with the Me Too movement has really brought that out into the open. Mm-hmm. And that, I think that's been a really positive thing, because it's putting it out so that we all have to kind of carry it instead of having it deep inside. But that kind of speaks to the shame that's been put upon women and that we internalize for ourselves. It's just, it's really insidious and kind of across the board. Not that we can't work our way out of it, because we absolutely can, because we're extremely resilient. Mm-hmm. But we just have to I think we have to notice that's what happens, and it kind of freezes us up a little bit, or just it closes people in. Their energy gets kind of constricted in with that shame. And the more we release it, the more our energy field can open up. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I agree, because I've had clients who, their mothers told them they were dirty, or, that area is dirty, or whatnot. And then I was raised Catholic, and I still practice somewhat. I integrate it with a lot of other spiritual things.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like masturbation was wrong. And I remember having to shift those limiting beliefs as I explored my own body, which then opened up the energy field. But I don't necessarily go around telling everybody that. I guess those are the things that I had to shift, because you were bad, and it was wrong. And really, I learned it's a way to control.
Yes.
Being taught that. And so that's why I kind of picked the pieces I liked of my upbringing, and mix it with my spirituality, other things. But because some things were just control. And that's what I realized. And I realized my life has kind of been in integrating the feminine, connecting to that. My journey has been releasing those kind of controlling, limiting beliefs that were ingrained from such a young age. And I know every woman out there, and even man who's listening, can relate to that. And
absolutely.
The shame and stuff we stuff down. Some of it we don't even cognitively know.
No, most of it.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of it's just really deep in there. Like, whether you were raised Catholic or not, that Catholicism is deeply embedded into all of our systems and culture. It's like, it's just there, whether you practice it or not. And there's a lot in there. That would be a good podcast topic alone right there. Digging into how, there's lots of beautiful ritual practices in most religions, I would say, but a few of them have done a real good job, like taking the feminine and just pushing it down.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, what would you like to share for our audience more about what holistic pelvic care is? We talked a little bit about it. But if they were going to see, for one, obviously, reading the book, but there's a lot in that book. It's
Yes.
a little overwhelming because it is
The
more
book,
manual.
yeah, the book can be really kind of dense for just kind of your average person, I would say. I always tell people, like practitioners like me who are really already nerds about anatomy and stuff,
Mhm.
like we'll just soak it right up. But I've noticed that when I give it to clients, then it can be overwhelming because it's basically a book full of energy medicine also.
Yeah.
So it's going to bring up all your stuff, and it's a whole new territory. So I always tell people to go slowly through that book, or also don't feel the need to go through it linearly because it's called Wild Feminine, for goodness sakes,
Yeah.
go into look in the index. There's a list of exercises, go to the table of contents, just pick a chapter that you like and go through it, non-linearly. But holistic pelvic care itself works directly on the muscles of the pelvic floor, like I mentioned before, but it's also energetic. So we help women breathe, like just learn how to breathe and sense into their pelvic bowl. And so they can sense the energy of the uterus, and they can sense the energy of the ovaries and the energy of the vagina, learn how to energetically clear the pelvic bowl, and how to bring energy in, and just how to clarify in general. So there's breath work and there's visualization. For the most part, it's a very gentle and simple technique. Unless somebody already has a pretty strong pain syndrome happening, there's usually not a lot of pain. Sometimes fascia can kind of hold some tension, and so when it releases, it's a little sharp. But for the most part, it's just a really gentle, honoring, very grounding practice. I often hear women, after they get up, then stand up off the table, when they're done, they're just like, oh, I just feel so grounded. And they almost say that they feel kind of like high, like I've just had some sort of drugs or something, or smoked weed or something like that, because they're just so relaxed and grounded and in their body, which I think is what people look for when they're looking for drugs and things like that feeling of being inside your body. And so that's really what it is. I think even more than the physical work, that's really what holistic pelvic care is, helping you bring your energy all the way down into your body and really inhabit on an energy level all the way down to your root. And often we just kind of inhabit like the upper half of our body.
Yes.
Yeah.
I see it all the time.
Yeah, I bet, in yoga for sure.
Well, besides, getting into the body and obviously kind of touching and releasing the shame, talk about Tammy calls it root wisdom, and I love that. Why this area is so important to get in touch with.
Well, if you think about it, I think we take for granted women and how we're able to have children and populate, the earth. It's pretty crazy when you really think about how that process even works. It's like a miracle, And so she talks a lot about how this area of the body is a spirit door inside the body. And females have this, but males don't have it to the same degree. And so this is where spirit actually comes in to create physical form. And that's kind of an intense process. And that's something we have access to, whether we're having children or not, or whether we're pregnant or not, or ever haven't been pregnant or not, or whether we have our organs or not. It's an energy thing that we have access to. So that's where you get this sense. And it's also like the root chakra. If you talk about chakras, just the root is our access point to the earth energy too. And so this area of the body is what gives us access to earth energy and spirit energy, and where all of that comes together to make form. So it's an extremely powerful place, and a place where we can access really deep wisdom. When you learn how to bring your energy field all the way down, like to your uterus, for example, and really hold space there, you can access wisdom from the earth, you can access wisdom from spirit, and it's just really super clear, and you can use that energy to create with to a pretty insane degree when you learn how to tap into it. So that's where I teach women, when you tap into that space and you learn how to listen to that little intuitive voice, that little yes or no comes from that root place. And it's such a loving voice, and it's a non-judgmental voice. And we're so used to listening to the voices that come into our head. And a lot of them are really judgmental and analytical. But when you drop all the way down in, you get these whispers, and it's deep wisdom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I completely agree. And that's why I wanted you on the show and to talk more about this. And I'll probably be inviting more people and maybe pick your brain for other guests.
Yeah.
Because I do think it's so important. And, I told you I'm 8.5 months pregnant. So definitely like that whole connection. It is, when you really try to think about it, it blows your mind. Like I cannot humanly comprehend what, like this miracle of life sort of thing.
Yeah.
and you don't have to have a child, just like you said, to experience, because we have this anyway, but just having wanted a child for so long and finding it happening, and also understanding, most of the energetics of it, not all of it, of course, because I'm human, but it's like, I sometimes will have such a strong emotional reaction because I can't, like, my mind cannot comprehend what is happening. I just can't explain it. And then I just sit with it like, well, that's just whatever, whatever emotion coming up, because I just can't put my head around it. And
that's the beauty, I think, of the female body that can create, that has the uterus and the ovaries and can do this. It really forces you to surrender. So you have to get out of your mind. And I think the women that struggle the most probably are the ones that are really stuck in their heads more. And so they're not as deep in, not to put any blame on anybody, but none of us have learned how to do this type of, so we all have to start somewhere. But yeah, it's incredible when you think about it. And I've worked with a lot of women who struggled with infertility also. And just to see how that whole process works, how sometimes it works and you can do everything right. And sometimes it doesn't, and you can, it's a miracle. Truly.
Sure. Yeah. Definitely. Are you trained in Mayan abdominal therapy as well, or?
No, I'm not personally trained in my abdominal therapy, but Tammy is, and that I think she did draw from a lot. They're like sister therapies in a lot of ways. I do have different visceral manipulation technique trainings, but I just haven't had a chance to do Mayan abdominal.
Okay. Well, I often share about that because I have a friend, Maria, who is in town. And I spent a couple of years doing Mayan abdominal therapy, which is probably what led me into all of this. And when I read work, was like, that's the missing piece. Because that's when, the whole uterus is the second heart of the woman made total sense to me. And at that point, mine was hiding on the left side. That's the word I use, kind of hiding. Yeah. And over 2 years, brought into the center in yoga, we call it the Shushumna, and that central channel. And I remember it was like a spiritual experience. Of course, sometimes it'd go back to hiding because that's the familiar place. It's interesting how the body works, right?
Yeah.
But I think it was that helped me. I didn't necessarily go out and deal with, infertility issues. I just sort of went like, oh, well, we'll see if this happens. But I think that investigative part of trying to figure out how to get me balanced is what led that connection to my second heart, for example.
Yeah.
And then eventually opened that door for pregnancy. It's not a scientific base by any means, but that's what I feel. And I've shared with my friends because there was that exploration within myself and that
absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it's so definitely, I think like all of this works so interchangeably. I liked how you said they're like sisters.
Yeah. They're like sister modalities or therapies. They really, like Mayan abdominal works more on the outside, and then deep into the pelvis from the outside, and then pelvic care, holistic pelvic care is doing really similar things just from the inside. And so the pelvis, when like I do a lot of all the way around, and then I add chiropractic in, so I'm lining up the joints also. Yeah. You just get this whole 360 degree therapy around for the pelvis internally and externally, which it doesn't usually get in any other modalities. Through chiropractic, it's still pretty male dominated. It's shifting a little bit, but I still wouldn't have the vast majority of male chiropractors do the internal work or even some of the deeper external work, just because there's also this level of honoring, but that needs to happen that I think unless you have this body type is hard to like really understand.
Yeah.
But yeah, it brings, like massage by itself is great for just bringing circulation to the area and releasing old stuff, even just from a physical level. And that's happening physically and energetically and spiritually with this type of work. Yeah. And it really helps people connect into their pelvis, and kind of is shocking to them how disconnected they were before.
Yeah. Would you be willing to share some examples? I mean, obviously not, specifics or anything, but just some examples so our audience could relate to maybe some things that women have come to your office and had some issues that where holistic pelvic care has helped resolve, or at least connected the dots and sent to maybe a different direction. Before you go, I had someone call me the other day who has been listening to the podcast and is going to a retreat, and I was so thankful that she shared this, because I'm like, oh, I'm obviously doing some, what I'm supposed to be sharing with the world. And she said just kind of being introduced to all of this, and then the work with the horses that I love to do, like set her on the path to investigating all of this. So yeah, if you'd share maybe some things that your patients will come in with, or
Sure.
helpful.
I would say the most common thing that comes in is stress incontinence. So this is when people pee themselves a little when they cough or sneeze. You probably see this in yoga classes. You see it a lot in fitness classes or postpartum.
Yes.
After the body's gone through a big stretch, sometimes the muscles don't come back perfectly, and then there's urine issues. And this is another thing that we're kind of taught, well, this is just kind of what you deal with as a female, which is not true. And so often it's just a matter of muscles. Usually the muscles on the posterior side or the back side are holding a lot more tension, and the muscles near the bladder aren't holding as much. This is why also I tell people not to do Kegels until they get a pelvic floor check. Because if you do Kegels in that situation, the muscles that are already strong are going to get stronger and stronger, and the ones that are weak are just going to keep getting weaker and weaker because they're not being addressed. So what holistic pelvic care does is just help balance all those so that it's really functioning as one unit instead of like two separate paths. Another popular, people come in for postpartum too. That's another really common. In France, the government pays for 12 pelvic floor physical therapy sessions for every woman after every baby. And so we don't do that. People don't even know about it here. And so that's just a really common, just rehab, just taking care of your body and putting it back together kind of after such a sacrifice of giving your body away to create a life, deserves a lot more honor, just that time period. I had a woman once who wanted to have a baby on her own. I live in Portland, Oregon, so we have lots of people who don't want the medical intervention, but sometimes you can take it a little too far. And not be prepared.
Yeah.
And so she was like out in the middle of nowhere, I think, and didn't have access to a hospital or anything. And I think I can't remember if she even had a midwife. I think she might've been on her own, but she ran into some trouble and then just kind of had to squeeze her baby out. And there was a lot of pelvic floor damage. And so people don't think about like what women actually go through when they have babies. She couldn't go to the bathroom normally, number 2, for like 3 years. So she ate avocados and bananas because the pelvic floor, like, our rectum goes through there. This is all stuff nobody wants to talk about, but it's like there's the bladder and the rectum, and there's just a lot of really important function that happens through the pelvic floor. And so she didn't have function. It took her a long time to actually come in, but because she was already a Reiki master and was really strong energy worker already, I was able to go deep into the energy work with her to release a lot of that trauma and fear that she went through. And she was going to the bathroom normally after 2 sessions.
Oh, wow. Wow. That's incredible.
And usually it takes a little longer than that. She was really tapped in, but that's just the kind of thing. Or like a lot of times people also come in with painful sex or an inability to have intercourse. And that's another huge issue for obviously couples. And, Mira, I think I've saved a few sex lives just in helping release some of those muscles. They can just get really locked up sometimes. And a lot of times it's based in like childhood trauma or other traumatic events that just never got addressed. Sure. And so a lot of body workers aren't really taught how to actually hold space for releasing trauma that gets stuck in the fascia. Mm-hmm. So yeah, those are like the most common things I would say I get.
Yeah, well, a lot of clients come to me with trauma and chronic pain. So
yeah,
if you're willing to, I'd love to have you speak about trauma getting caught up in the fascial tissue, whether it's in the pelvic floor or wherever, but just how it resides in the body, what you've seen might be a little bit what I've seen, but just in general, I think it's good to speak about.
Yeah, I personally, now we don't have a lot of data on this, so I've read a lot about it, and I think we're getting more and more. Like if you follow quantum physics or what we're learning about with fascia, I think there's more and more, and there's a ton of evidence now for Reiki and how all of this really works, but we don't know for sure. But what makes the most sense to me right now is understanding fascia. Fascia is kind of a crystalline structure, so it makes sense that energy runs through fascia. So it runs through, I think, our nervous system, and I feel like fascia is the interface between the nervous system and the muscular system. And it just, in the pelvic floor where I have the most experience, I can really feel, and it's very easy to feel in there because you have like one finger in the vagina, and it's very concentrated. So it's easier for me to feel those trauma patterns inside there than on the outside. But I know people who are opposite. So anyway, what happens is the muscle just gets like locked down, and I feel like that energetic, I guess a good way to describe it on an external level is like, when somebody's depressed, you can almost see their whole posture kind of pulling down, like the chest just kind of rolls in. And I think that's, it's heartbreak almost, and you're just kind of covering your heart. And when you look at emotions and things like that from that perspective, you start to see these patterns like, oh, there's emotional patterns in the body. And so I think trauma patterns energetically just get locked into the muscle fascia, which just creates that tension. And then until you bring breath and awareness to it, it just won't release. And I think that's the body's way of saying, I have this thing I need to release, and I'm not going to release it until it has attention. Like, what you're releasing. And so in the pelvic floor, it's trauma release is often as simple as, once you've had the training to learn how to really hold space for someone when they're releasing darker things, it can be as simple as bringing breath to the area and just acknowledging like, oh, there's some emotion stuck in here, and letting it release. And usually it's as simple as that. Sometimes there's layers, and depending on how deep it is and how far it goes back into childhood, sometimes it takes multiple times to really get through it. But it's kind of incredible how and I also think it doesn't always show up into the muscle until it's actually ready to release.
Sure. Yes.
So by the time someone gets to my office, like, I'm not a counselor, so I don't sit and talk through it all. It's like when someone's really stuck and they can't release it, and I teach them, like, if you really open yourself up and let it through, and you don't feel relief after you emote, then you got to go work through this with a counselor and like dig in. But I think the counseling and body work, trauma informed body work, is so powerful. I just feel like it's everyone's birthright to experience that combination of therapy.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because counseling therapy is really helpful, especially to bring it to the surface. But getting into the body, it seems, has been the greatest way to release it, or at least I've seen in my clients. Or at least become more aware of it. Sometimes it's easy to talk through things.
Yes.
And it's good to talk it out, because that is in itself. Or it helps give you understanding or behavioral changes, those sort of things. But sometimes there's things that the body just holds on to that, it's actually connecting back the mind and the body is where you can actually find that release. And I told you before we hopped on, I'm getting craniosacral today. And I was like, that somato-emotional release stuff, which my person's trained in, I'm like, well, I hope she'll like help me through whatever I'm holding on to that I can't figure out. Because cognitively, obviously, I'm not going to know, but I'm pretty in tune with in the body. But there's always those deeper layers that sometimes we don't know, and we need help and expertise to uncover. And so I always look for, even for myself, I need other experts to help me through some things. And that's why, it's good to go seek out people like yourself and
it can be important to have witness, I think. I think that's why we can't always work through everything by ourselves, because sometimes we need to just receive and have witness, and that can be really, really important. And you brought up another good point, because there's layers and layers, but there's also like lineage layers. So like we also carry our family ancestry, and that's, now we know, even through science, that's in our DNA. So we're also like working through trauma that's not even necessarily ours. Sometimes. And when it comes to having a baby, that kind of stuff comes online big time. So you might be working through like your mother's stuff or your dad's stuff, or up through the line, because that's part of having a baby and being pregnant.
Well, and I'm glad you're speaking to that, because I think I might do a couple episodes on prenatal and pregnancy things, because I have lots of friends and other practitioners across the nation who I know, would speak on that, especially the clinics and whether it's practical things after, baby's born, or the lineage stuff, because I was like, there's stuff coming up this year. Wow.
Yeah.
This is supposed to be like the greatest year of my life. Because I'm so in tune, like I recognize all these things which was good to process, but it's just interesting how that works. And luckily at the wellness center I own, and yoga studio, we have some energy workers, and I would have to thank them for introducing me, on top of what I've read with Tammy Kent and other people, but introducing me more to that ancestral lineage sort of thing. So we have someone who offers family constellation, which every time I worked 3 months with clients, I would include that, because that was something they couldn't access.
Yeah.
They needed some help with that, and I would share my experience with it. And every one of them that I referred to our practitioner would just have this different healing. And sometimes that would be the shift they needed, where I may not be able to meet them, because I had some more challenging clients than others some days, and I might not have met them with my modalities, but because we had several practitioners, that ancestral lineage, or working with even your parent in that energy context of family constellation, was very helpful. Yeah. So even if recognizing someone was holding on to something, like for me, I learned how much sadness I was holding on to my mom, or from my mom. Like it was her sadness, not mine. And then, and I had my own stuff to deal with. And then I also learned, my mom had always said, my uncle, who was a Vietnam vet, I'm the only one he ever told his story to. And he suffers from PTSD. And he told me when I was in elementary school, when I interviewed him, and then now we're reconnected, like he helped build the rope wall in the studio. And I was holding on to his story and pain, because I've always been empathic. And it was like, I would not have believed it, but in that family constellation session, I felt the tension in my traps, and then felt it release, and then back to him. And I was like, this is
yeah, I know, it's amazing. I've been doing this work since 2011, and it still amazes me every week. Something just blows me out of the water, and I'm just like, what? This is so cool. So it's really deep work.
It's really important to discuss that and understand that there is ancestral lineage trauma, and good things too. And I call on my ancestors to help support me, like even through having a baby and all the women before me and all of that.
Absolutely.
To know that I'm not, like I'm not alone. I'm very supported energetically and in this physical human realm. But there's also things, when we're going through stuff, sometimes it's just not ours.
Yeah. A lot, especially if you're empathic.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's very important to understand. Was there anything else you'd love to share, Danielle, with our audience? We'll link, and I know there's a link to find a holistic care practitioner in your area.
Yeah.
Not everybody I know is in Portland, but
But if people are in Portland and they're interested in finding me, they can go to DrDanielleCornelius.com. I'm pretty easy to find on the web. And then Tammy Kent, her website is wildfeminine.com, and she has a practitioner directory there. So she does trainings like twice a year usually, and maybe more. Sometimes she's been traveling a little bit more now that her kids are older. So you can find practitioners in in a lot of areas now. There's more and more of us around the world, actually. So you can find practitioners there, and you can always contact me if there isn't a practitioner on that list, because we also have a private group, and one of us in the group can like ask around for other people or find you other resources. And, holistic pelvic care Tammy Kent is a physical therapist. She kind of went outside of her industry to add in the spiritual component. So she doesn't like work in a hospital like a traditional physical therapist, But women's health physical therapy is also really helpful. It doesn't always have that energetic spiritual component, but you can get that in other places. So for people who don't have access to holistic pelvic care practitioners, I think women's health PT is also a good place to start. And then just look for energy healers to kind of, add that layer in at the same time is what I would do in that situation. So there are resources for a lot of women, and there's more and more and more. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you shared that. I've seen women's health and physical therapists pop up more and more in the Indianapolis area.
Yeah.
And even the hospital where I'm giving birth, they have acupuncture and women's health PT, and I'm just blown away by that. I'm sure it's still very medicalized, but
it's shifting.
It's shifting. Yeah, exactly. It is shifting. And I even saw when we hosted some pelvic floor yoga things, some pelvic floor physical therapists came in, chiropractors came, all kinds of different modalities, and then people who just had, were interested in it because of their own issue. So I thank you for raising awareness. We'll link to your podcast. So for everyone, Danielle has the Vital Vagina podcast, which is interesting. And she actually has an episode with Tammy Ken, which was great. I've listened to a few of your episodes. And so if you're really wanting to delve into this side, I would suggest we'll link to that in the show notes as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, that was episode 12, I believe. And we kind of went into a little bit of the lineage stuff too. So that is a good conversation for people if they're interested in that. Yeah.
Definitely. So we'll make sure we link to all of those things you mentioned. Any final thoughts?
Nothing is coming to my head other than I just always have a wish for women that they are embodied in their pelvic bowl. So if anyone feels like, because I used to, when I was in the corporate world and going to school all the time, I felt like a walking like popsicle, like just everything, all my energy was in my head and nothing else down below. So that's just my wish for everyone, is to just feel into your pelvis and use those feelings and that sensation that you feel from that place to act from, instead of always listening to your head voice. So if people could just start practicing and like even playing with the idea of just listening to their root, I think a lot of things in this world will calm down.
I completely agree. Thank you, Danielle, for being on this show. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate that.
So I want to hear from all of you out there. What did you think of today's topic and conversation? Did you love it? So find me on Instagram or Facebook under Alyssa Finnig and direct message me. Or better yet, join the Wild Wisdom Collective group on Facebook. It's a free group. Chime in on the discussion, and you can just search in groups. You'll find us on there. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts and insight about today's discussion, and also what else you'd love to hear about. And if you do love what you're hearing, take a moment on your smartphone, click the button to subscribe, and write us a review so that we can continue sharing this with more and more women out there. See you next week at the same time with another incredible guest. Wild blessings.